Hey everyone, and welcome to Two Steps Forward, where sustainability meets business reality.
We're living in an era where, for the most part, what we're doing is tweaking the system rather than transforming the system. I call it, sustainability as usual. And what it means from my perspective is that businesses have, for the most part, embraced sustainability as part of their core strategy and practices, but it's still very much grounded in the prioritization of profit maximization and growth, mostly short term.
I'm Joel McCower, and that was Raz Godelnik from the Parsons School of Design talking about sustainable business models, teaching the next generation of sustainability professionals, and lots of other things. More from him in a bit, but first, let me say a warm hello to my co-host and friend, Solitaire Townsend. Hello, Soli.
Hi, Joel. Joel, this week I've been reading so much about the death of sustainability. I wanted to raise that with you and kind of going, are you seeing the same thing?
Oh, absolutely. And, let's just get it over with and quote Mark Twain.
You win. Yeah. You got to quote him first. There we go.
Yes, the death of corporate sustainability has been wildly exaggerated. Bloomberg said that announced big business is abandoning its climate goals, and Harvard Business Review says corporate sustainability is in crisis. One blog asked, "Is corporate sustainability dead?" And it's really interesting because we never saw those stories that said corporate sustainability is alive and well.
Yeah.
When companies announce bold, audacious goals, it rarely gets much attention outside of the trellis and the corporate sustainability media, small as it is. But when they backtrack or when they decide that they can't reach it, they have to reduce the amount or extend the time frame or something like that, it gets headlines. And so we're in this moment right now where it's decidedly tough. Companies are struggling. There's political pushback, regulatory uncertainty, economic uncertainty. Companies are really, in some ways, frozen in their tracks. And that's getting all the attention. And I guess that when people die, it's more newsworthy than when they're born. So maybe there's something there. I'm speaking as a journalist who, thinks about what is news. But is it really dying, Soli? What are you seeing?
So, again, I've been around long enough to have seen that same headline again and again and again whenever there's an economic downtime or a challenge. One of the things which frustrates me about it is, number one, as you said, it's very much overboiled in response to a couple of companies changing what they're doing and dialing some stuff up and dialing some stuff down. It's also like Europe, EU obsessed in terms of what's currently some of the political climate in Europe and EU around the omnibus, around what's happening in the US, etc., and completely ignoring the fact that China has got a big new sustainability standard that everybody has to meet by 2027. So China's ramping it up. We're seeing explosion in some of our work that Futerra does in South America, particularly in the run-up to COP. And all across Asia, this is absolutely on the rise. And you're seeing new CSOs and lots of recruitment happening in sustainability. So, number one, it seems to be relatively myopic on one or two markets and assuming that those are your future markets, as opposed to where most of your consumers live, which are probably elsewhere in the world. And secondly, very overblown compared to what's happening. But as you said, that kind of stuff makes better headlines than, hey, sustainability is changing. That it definitely is.
And as you said, we Europeans and Americans spend a lot of time navel-gazing and not looking that far beyond our borders at Asia, South America, maybe a little bit in Africa as well. There is a lot going on. And I think the pressure that companies are feeling now is really a pressure test, looking at what is really effective. How do we go from, this is something that Ann Tracy said in our last episode, from morality to materiality. So I think this is actually a really good moment for sustainable business, as painful as it may be, in reassessing, taking a hard look at what's really worth doing, what's really moving the needle, what's the highest and best use of our time and very limited budget that we devote to sustainability. And at the same time, this is really moving out into the various job functions and business units and getting away from this, command central sustainability executive. With all due respect to our many, many, many friends who are chief sustainability officers at companies, I think this is their dream come true, which is that they're no longer the person, that this is now getting pushed out. And so I think it's become more diffuse, and diffuse means it's harder to see, harder to detect perhaps, but it's become part of the fabric. And that's in some ways the headline that I promise you, will never, ever see.
Do you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me a lot of all of the dot-com bubble conversations that were had, where suddenly this incredibly exciting new thing was on the block. Everybody was writing about it. Everybody was interested in it. There were some specialists who knew what they were doing. And then everyone said, oh, it's all over. It's burst. And this is not happening anymore. But what actually happened was that it had been integrated. So we're seeing a lot of integration in sustainability, often not even referred to sustainability, because it's become such a giant agenda now that trying to talk about the agenda all at once is quite hard. And instead, you've got a huge amount of work going on renewables, on energy efficiency, on packaging. In fact, I've got so many events that I'm going to which are around packaging, which almost never talk about sustainability. They're talking about lightweighting, they're talking about recycling, because they've become huge subsectors all of their own. So all of this is happening. It just might not be owned, controlled by the sort of central functions anymore. The other thing which I think is really going to happen over the next couple of years is that we're going to see some fundamental changes in how businesses approach talking about sustainability and thinking about sustainability. And that's one of the pieces of work I've been doing with Oxford University, with Oxford Net Zero, on these spheres of influence, which is where actually everything being about your purpose, your company, what you're doing, rather than how are you serving your customers, your consumers and society on sustainability. I think we're going to start to see quite a big change around that. And whether it looks and sounds and speaks like sustainability, or whether it looks and sounds and speaks like something else, I think we're going to see a lot of change to the language.
Yeah, and this, as it becomes part of the fabric, I increasingly think about safety as an issue. You don't hear companies talk about their safety record. I mean, maybe on a job site or maybe in a factory there's that, but they don't put out articles or press releases or hold conferences. Well, maybe there are some. I don't go to those, but some safety conferences. Safety is an expectation. Safety is what companies need to do to survive and thrive and be profitable and reduce and manage their risks and all of those things that companies do every single day. But it's just become part of the fabric. And I'd like to think that sustainability is going in that direction where it's not shouted from the rooftops. And I know solely that you are the co-founder of a you call it a change agency, but it's a lot of communications. And so that may be a tough moment in terms of if companies aren't shouting this from the rooftops, how are they communicating it, or do they even need to? But I think we're going through, I believe, a pivot on that. Companies right now are being forced to keep their head below the parapet, just not talk about this stuff for fear of whatever from whoever. That may be a good thing. That may be worth doing, and just do the work. Get the work done. And sure, you can talk about it in your report, and you can maybe put out a press release when there's something really extraordinary. But in general, I don't know that we need to be talking about this all the time so much as just having an impact.
And I think one of the biggest problems we've had over the last few years is ego marketing, where people have been spending like a marketing level budget on corporate comms of talking about what they're doing on sustainability. You're saying, people need to talk about what they're doing on sustainability less. They've always needed to have done that. No one gives a damn. Your consumers don't care what you're doing on sustainability. They don't care about what your corporate is doing, what you're committing to. And they never have. I've always been talking about this big purpose campaign that sell what you're doing, but don't sell your product. What we do need to double down on and do a great deal more of is actually talking about how sustainability makes our products better, and actually focusing on what's in it for the consumer, because we do know that consumers do want to know about sustainability. They want to know a great deal more about sustainability, but they only want to know about it on a product level. They don't care about it at a corporate level. So I think that's one of the things which we need to see more of, and that is a completely different picture in China. in the rest of Asia, across South America, where actually you might need to be dialing up some of what you're doing on sustainability because it's a huge proof point of trust and quality. So again, I think we're going to be really careful with making sure that the advice we're giving in Europe and North America is different, the advice we're giving in South America is different, the advice we're giving across Africa, across the Middle East, across Asia is different right now. And that's one thing which I don't think corporates have caught up with, which is you need to have a differentiated strategy of how you talk about this across the world, which is not easy after a period of globalization and central messaging.
I know you focus a lot on consumer brands. That's a good part of what Futera and you, Soli, have been doing. I think there's a lot of really interesting stuff going on the B2B side or the supply chain piece that companies don't talk about. And the irony of, we've talked about this say-do gap of consumers where they say they want to do a certain thing and they don't really do it. And yet products are becoming increasingly, I just have to say the word, greener than they used to be because companies have been systematically squeezing out the waste and energy and inefficiency and carbon intensity and toxicity, water intensity of their products. Because it's good business, because it reduces risk, because maybe because there's some reputational benefit, but rarely, particularly on a factory and a B2B part of this. And a lot of this, of course, rolls up to consumer products. But the action, the things that companies are doing that are meaningful, that are material, may be 2 or 3 steps away from the brand that ultimately packages and sells the product. So I think that's part of what's going on here too, is that we're just not seeing, because it's not visible, a lot of the actions that are taking place.
B2B is huge. I was asked to speak at a dinner that was being held a couple of weeks ago here in the UK, which was a really big built environment company that invited a whole load of their customers and their tenants to a nice dinner to talk about sustainability. I talked about solutionists and what we can change and loads of examples around the world, and they talked about what they were doing. Now that isn't a big marketing campaign, and it's not a flashy ad. What it is very focused communication, as you said, between a built environment company and its customers and tenants, all about sustainability, and they all turned up because they wanted to hear about it. I think we're going to see a lot more of that as well, which is talk to the people who want to know. Don't ram this down the throats of people who don't, but make sure that you're not, when you're worried about talking about stuff in the public, make sure you don't green hush in the private, because one of the things which I'm also worried about at the moment is everyone's so anxious about what might happen with a Lobby Starbucks campaign or what might come down to them from being attacked in public, and forgetting that there are lots of audiences, your staff, female consumers, your customers, who still want and need to know a lot about this, and there's a lot of overcorrecting happening right now, which then is going to be really costly a couple of years down the line when you've got to correct it all back the other way again.
Give me an example of an overcorrection.
So an overcorrection would be where you decide to not talk about sustainability, not talk about climate, not talk about packaging, not talk about water, not talk about human rights, not talk about farmers, not talk about your supply chain, just shut it all down, shut it all down, shut it all down, in order to avoid the risk of being criticised in this. But you might not even have been criticised yet, but you're terrified that you're going to be criticised. And in doing so, you leave a silence, and silence is suspicious. And so a huge number of your customers, of your staff, of your potential staff, of your consumers, of your partners might suddenly think you're stopping doing all of those things. And then you may end up overcorrecting where you might never have been attacked, but you are definitely now disappointing and confusing other consumers. So it is not an easy track to walk. It really, really isn't. But let's not do kind of panic PR in either direction, and be really, really thoughtful about what we say to whom, and crucially where in the world. Because again, you really, really don't want to be dialing this down in Asia right now.
Right. And when people don't hear a story from you, they start making up their own. And so that creates this really fine line between talking too much or not talking at all. And finding that sweet spot is really, I guess, solely that's how you make a living.
Well, it's literally my job, and I also enjoy doing it because hey, if everything stayed the same all the time, if there were never any challenges, never any changes in the market, if we just had sort of a relatively benign sustainability is good situation, how dull would that be? So I'm actually really excited about this moment because people are bringing me challenges. So I'm going, oh, this is hard. Let's actually work this through. Let's actually see if we can map out visions and messages and positionings and things which will resonate in this new world. So, it's refreshing.
I love that spirit that the house is on fire and slowly you're going to run into it and try to put it out. That's a great, noble, bold, and important
Maybe because
thing.
it's fun.
Oh, yeah, that's fun. Exactly. Well, let's move over to the conversation about the future leaders, the grad students and others that are learning about sustainable business models and sustainable business in general. What are they hearing? What do they need to know? That's the conversation that we had recently with Raz Godelnik from the Parsons School. Let's listen in. Raz Godelnik is Associate Professor of Strategic Design and Management at the Parsons School of Design, where he teaches undergraduate and graduate courses in innovation, leadership, sustainable design, business models, and strategic design. He's also the author of the book Rethinking Corporate Sustainability in the Era of Climate Crisis, a strategic design approach, and he posts regularly on Medium, where I saw the article we're going to talk about today. But first, Raz Godelnik, welcome to Two Steps Forward.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Before we get into the piece in question, Raz is someone who's been a teacher, researcher, and sometimes sharp critic of sustainable business. What do you think of this moment?
I think it's an interesting moment. I think it's definitely a difficult moment on some level, but I think that there's something to be learned from every moment, including this moment. So I think I try to see both the positive and the negative, not just the negative, which is probably the easiest thing to do. But I really try to see what we can learn from it.
Well, let's get into maybe some of the things we can learn from it through the context of this piece you wrote on Medium a while back called 5 Lessons from Teaching Sustainable Business Models in 2025. First, give us a little context about this piece and the course you teach and how you came to write this.
So I'm teaching, or I taught the spring semester, 2 sections of a course called Sustainable Business Models. It's part of our master's program in strategic design and management. And it's really one of my favorite courses as it delves into sustainability, into business models, also into entrepreneurship. And it's always a great journey that I try to always define and frame it as both a professional but also as a personal journey for the students, because we try really to do different projects that are also getting them to see how sustainability relate to their own life. I think this is really the best way from my experience to learn about sustainability, not just as a theoretical concept, but really as something that, as a way of life, in terms of the challenges and the opportunities. So what I do every class, I end it with a request for the students to share what is their key takeaway from that week. And it's a good moment of reflection of what we did that week. And I thought it would be interesting for me to walk the walk and do the same at the end of the semester. And as we talked about this moment, I thought it would be interesting to think about what does it mean for me to teach this course and share some of my own reflections at the end of the semester.
And just for context, tell us a little about these undergrad or grad. What kind of life experience or work experience do they have?
So these are grad students. This is a course that they take in their first year of the graduate program. Most of them are coming from creative backgrounds, and some of them are coming also from business backgrounds, and they're really looking into expanding their professional experience and knowledge, and what they're looking into is really gaining a better understanding of what does it mean to bring a design mindset into an organizational context. And then once the students graduate, then they really take it to many industries where they work. This is a program that is industry agnostic, so you can really find them everywhere. And what I also like about the students is that they're overall very passionate about sustainability, and this is what makes this course also a special part of the program, and also just a fun course to teach for me.
So, one of the things which I absolutely love about all of your writing, Raz, and I've read a lot of it, is considering that you're teaching sustainability and you're teaching people who are so fascinated by sustainability, you actually de-center sustainability in a lot of what you're talking about, around the fact that often sustainable business models aren't about sustainability, or the great article you wrote about 1.5 lifestyles isn't about 1.5, it's about lifestyles. So in these ideas that you've put forward, in these lessons you've put forward, a couple of them are about decentering sustainability and centering other things. How do the students take that when they turn up to learn about sustainability and you're actually telling them, you want to do sustainability sometimes means doing something which isn't called sustainability at all?
I think it's difficult to grasp with as an idea, but I think this is part of just embracing strategic design mindset. The idea that you need to operate on different levels, and that you're able to both incorporate, or that you're trying to both incorporate a vision and a DNA, for a company that are more sustainability driven, but at the same time, you also understand that you need to meet people where they are, and meeting people where they are. Many times it means that you don't lead with sustainability, right? You actually lead with, other priorities that people actually care more about. And I think that's critical. And also it's part of really understanding that there are some levels of complexity that we need to embrace, and this is overall a very nuanced field or subject, and there is no other way to approach it, at least from my perspective, to do so effectively.
I was thinking about a conversation that Joel and I had been having about the fact that a couple of weeks ago, news came out that Vinted, the second-hand clothes website, was now the biggest clothes company in France, the birthplace of haute couture, and about how that might fit your lesson number 3, which is for sustainable business models to succeed, sustainability should take a backseat. You've got other examples where it's been a super successful sustainability business that doesn't talk about sustainability.
I'll give two examples. One that is more nuanced, and one that perhaps is less. So I'll start with the first one. So I participated in a packaging conference a couple of days ago. So I have many packaging examples in my mind. And one of them is actually coming from Marks and Spencer and their refilled initiative. And I think this is a good experience because they're trying really to help consumers move into reusable packaging, but at the same time they're looking into the user experience and what they are thinking about, and rightly so, as we can see from many other unsuccessful initiatives to do the same, is really how do you make it easy, right? How do you make it as easy as possible for the consumers to bring back their empty bottles and buy new ones? How do you make the bottles attractive, right? How do you make the whole experience as seamless and frictionless as possible? So this is, I think, a good example of how do you do something that is very sustainable at its core, but in a way that actually is trying to prioritize other elements that customers are just care more about. So that would be one thing. Another example is I'm thinking about, for example, wardrobe apps. All of these apps that help you sort of shop your own closet, right? The idea that these different apps. Most of them are AI driven. They help you to make the most of what you already have in your closet, which is really a great way to help you to figure out what you already have, their messages, their overall way in which they approach customers, and overall how they build a business is not necessarily about sustainability. It's really about convenience. It's really about saving money, and overall it's, I think, a good way to showing how you could prioritize sustainability without talking about sustainability.
So much of what we're talking about here starts with definitions. And you note in your article that sustainable business model there's no real definition. It's kind of vague. But you note that the key issue is moving beyond sustainability as usual. That's pretty vague as well. I mean, it seems like you're substituting one vague thing for another. What does that mean to you, sustainability as usual, or moving beyond that? And what are the implications, the message, I guess, that you'd like to share with corporate sustainability professionals in terms of how to think in those terms about as usual?
Yeah, I mean, I think that goes really to one of the core arguments that I'm trying to make, that we're living in an era where, for the most part, what we're doing is tweaking the system rather than transforming the system. I call it, sustainability as usual. And what it means from my perspective is that businesses have, for the most part, embraced sustainability as part of their core strategy and practices, but it's still very much grounded in the prioritization of profit maximization and growth, mostly short-term growth. And what it means is that you are usually constrained with whatever you're doing to initiatives and ideas that you could, apply as long as there isn't any, tension with profit maximization or with growth. And the way I see companies that are trying to move beyond sustainability as usual are those that are trying really to prioritize their values. The ones that are not necessarily looking just for cost effective measures. I think that those that show that sustainability is truly part of their DNA. I provide definitions and so forth, but to make it clearer, as I pointed out, it's really more of a detective work. It's not just a simple yes or no question, right? When you look into a company and you try to figure out if this company is still in a sustainability as usual mode, or what I call sort of the current sandbox, or it's trying to move beyond that, I think there's needs to be some detective work looking into what the company is doing overall, and looking really into beyond this or that activity, which could be confusing, trying to see the whole forest rather just one or two trees.
Let me push on that a little bit, because as someone who's worked in corporate purpose for a very long time, I think sometimes there are companies with fantastic corporate purposes that you don't see in reality, and sometimes companies who don't have any corporate purpose but have an amazing impact. One of your other articles that you've written on the fact that a lot of 1.5 lifestyle corporate activity is completely unintentional. One of the examples you give in there is about Ozempic, and about all of these weight loss injections and the incredible impact they could have on consumption, and both in terms of health, huge health benefits, but also in terms of quite literal consumption, particularly consumption of some of the foodstuffs that we know have quite negative carbon footprints. I'm pretty sure none of the companies behind Ozempic have got sustainability as their purpose in doing that. So how do we align that sense that companies with really strong purposes don't sometimes live up to them, and companies that don't have a sustainability purpose sometimes do really good things?
It's true, and life is full of surprises, and I guess this is part of it. I'll try to put it this way. Going back to where we are, I think this is a good moment to acknowledge two things. I mean, one, there is a system that was put in place by companies. How do we plan and execute net zero plans, and how do we move forward to hopefully, align ourselves with, the Paris Agreement goals? I think that the system that we have is in place is very vulnerable and not very effective. And I think this moment helps us see that the vulnerability and just how challenging it is with all the companies that are taking step back from their commitments. And overall, I mean, looking not just at the commitments but also the progress, it's very challenging to see how any of that will eventually will be concluded in an outcome that is even close to net zero. So that's one thing. The other thing is that I think what we also see is that we talk a lot about what companies do internally, but what is also important is to acknowledge that a lot of what is going on is defined by external forces. I mean, the fact that many companies are now taking a step back, or are changing some of their policies and so forth, right? The fundamentals haven't changed, right? What has changed is the political environment, and I think it's important to acknowledge that we zoom in into companies. It's also important to zoom out and to look into the regulatory environment, to look into social norms, right? To look into the market incentives and so forth. And that's critical. Just to give a better perspective about how companies operate, we always look for levers of change, right? Where are the pressure points that we need to be focusing on? So many times it's not necessarily inside the company, it's outside the company. And I think to go to the Ozempic example, it also shows the importance, right, of focusing of what people actually care about. I think one of the issues is that companies are focusing too much on upstream initiatives. They don't pay much attention to the engagement with customers. They don't pay enough attention about the alignment of whatever they're offering customers with the priorities of customers. So this is where we see, I mean, if we think about what have changed in the lives of customers in terms of their level of sustainability looking 5 or 10 or 15 years ago, I think that for the most part not that much. And I think for me it's a sign of a failure, and one that we should acknowledge.
One of the realities that your students, I'm pretty sure, encounter is one that not just emerging professionals, but all professionals in sustainability get to at some point, which is that this stuff is really, really hard. Transforming products, services, business models, company cultures, and all of that. We had, I think in our last episode, we spoke with Ann Tracy, who's the CSO at Colgate-Palmolive, and talked a bit about the toothpaste tube that they redesigned to be one monomer HDPE number 2 plastic, and that it ultimately has become the default. But it took quite a number of years to test that out. It took more additional years to work with MRFs, the recycling facilities, in terms of making sure that they would be able to process these used toothpaste tubes and so on. This stuff takes a long time. I'm sure a lot of your students come in gung-ho. They want to make change. They want to make stuff happen. They want to see it happen quickly because everyone knows that it needs to. How do you prepare them for this world? And do you have ideas, even better, about how companies can move further faster?
Whoa, that's a lot. I think, I mean, the toothpaste tube is a good example. One thing that I try to install in them is really about how do we ask better questions. And I think that, with all due respect and love to, Colgate-Palmolive, I think when we ask the question of, just how do we move from, toothpaste tubes, from the materials that they're currently produced to ones that could be recycled. I'm not sure if this is the right question. What I'm asking my students is to acknowledge that there are different spheres of action and influence. I want them to acknowledge that just moving from one material to another, but still staying within the realm of disposable products will, have some value, but probably not enough to move into, again, the future that is more desirable. If we want really to move into that future and do it faster, because there's a sense of urgency that we need to acknowledge, then it's really about how do we move on a business model level, how do we move on the customer experience level, ensuring that we're creating experiences that are delightful, that customers are actually interested in, and perhaps most importantly, how do we change mindset, right? I don't think that recycled toothpaste tube will change any mindset, but I think that moving into a different way to help people clean their teeth while not using any disposable packaging would do. So I think that this is definitely a time to look into ways and products and services that are more disruptive. I think that it's not necessarily the easiest way to do, but I think it's what we need to do. So my message for them is that this is a challenge, but also an opportunity, because I think what you want is really to figure out what comes next and how to make it into reality. And there are some good examples to learn from, and I try also to give them not just this spiel of what needs to be done, but also some ideas about how to make it happen.
Let's focus on that, how to make it happen a little bit, because I think that we're in this massive era, particularly in large corporates, of sustainability compliance. That everybody is focusing on their reporting, they're focusing on their numbers, they're focusing on meeting the goals. There was that piece of research that was done that said that they're spending more money, particularly with auditing firms, than they are on exactly what you're talking about there, which is innovation and strategic activity and business model work. I call it managerial sustainability versus entrepreneurial sustainability. And there's a lot of managerial sustainability going on and not much entrepreneurial. So how do we incentivize companies to flip that? And how do we incentivize the business community to see that entrepreneurial, inventive sustainability you're talking about there, where you're being disruptive in your design? How do we incentivize that to happen, particularly during this moment where most people in sustainability have become a compliance person?
True. I mean, part of it is really just pressure. I mean, we've seen right now what are the outcomes of pressure. I think that, for the most part, these are, undesirable outcomes. But I think what they show, again, going out to what we can learn from this moment, is how very quickly what seemed to be very unacceptable or just impossible became both acceptable or somewhat acceptable and possible due to pressure, outside pressure on companies. I think we could think about utilize that and perhaps apply this pressure, but towards doing again taking steps that we find to be more desirable. So I think we shouldn't be afraid from the status quo, and the fact that what seems to be going on right now probably going to be in the next 5, 10, 20 years. No, I think that again this moment shows that things are much more volatile than we think. So applying pressure on these external systems directly or indirectly on companies, so that would be one thing. I think there's also a lot of room for entrepreneurship that will provide businesses with the idea of what can be done, because many times it's easier just to start from scratch and to do it right. Beyond that, I think there's also a way and a room for thinking about how to create ecosystems. I think one example that I use is the reusable cup project in Petaluma, California. And I think what the lesson that I see there and I share with my students is really about how companies are working together, right, to create this ecosystem that not only helps them to create scale, but also help them to shield themselves, from more sort of, traditional shareholder concerns about, the cost of moving from disposable cups to reusable cups. I think it's easier to do it when everyone is doing it, especially in an environment, right, when you don't have the policy to support it. So I think that hopefully we can see more external organizations, stakeholders that are pushing companies, to do that, to work together to create these ecosystems that will help shield them, from the type of shareholder capitalism pressure that we see too often.
So, Raz, before we let you go, I'm curious if you look forward in 5 years and you have a reunion of the class of 2025 and they come back together and talk about what they're doing, what they've done, what they're excited about. What would you be looking for to know that you got through to these students, that you made a difference?
So one thing that is really critical for us, and I didn't talk about it much, but really how to install in them a sense of agency. Too often we just ask ourselves, what can we do? I mean, I'm just, one person, what difference can I make? And definitely, there's sense of agency and the idea that, as a creative, as a strategic designer, as a communicator, as someone who is going out to the world, with skills and knowledge and passion and interest and willingness to do something, different. I think that it opens, many doors and allow you really to hopefully to make some good in the world. What I do hope, if we have this meeting in 5 years, right, is to see, wherever they will be going, even if these are, just small ways of doing difference and small ways of experimenting with, with change. If they will be doing it, that would be great. What I think that I would be very happy to see is that no matter what they do, they still have a very good idea in their mind of, what change should look like and how do we really need to push for, change that is more radical, not just incremental, and they have a good way of differentiating between the two, and they're able to apply it in whatever work they do. So if they would be doing it, I think I would be very happy, and I would probably think that, I've done something right.
That sounds like a lesson well learned. Raz Godelnik is Associate Professor of Strategic Design and Management at the Parsons School of Design. His article on Medium, 5 Lessons from Teaching Sustainable Business Models in 2025, is well worth checking out. Raz, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you both.
Sully, I'm guessing that, like me, you get to speak at a lot of business schools. I love it. It's one of my favorite things I get to do. Not so much about running my mouth, although I like to share, but hearing their questions. They have the best questions because they don't know a lot. And they're really, fresh, that fresh look of things. And they ask questions that I've never been asked before. And I love those kinds of questions.
Oh, yeah. I think the hardest question that I get asked, I lecture at Imperial and elsewhere, is what would you do if you were my age? Just like, what would you do right now? And it's just suddenly think you've got your whole career ahead of you. And the thing which I'm super excited about is watching what those students are going to do next.
Absolutely. Well, as usual, there's lots more to talk about, but let's put an end to this episode. Thanks, Sully. It's always a great pleasure. Thanks to everyone out there listening. Be sure to follow or subscribe to 2 Steps Forward wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe to Trellis Briefing, the daily newsletter from Trellis Group. Just go to trellis.net to sign up. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention Sully's regular musing on Substacks. Always a pleasure, insightful, fun, inspiring, and empowering. Really, Sully, I love those. And finally, please follow Sully and me on LinkedIn. That's it for this episode. We'll see you next time.